With the thing and the people and the hey everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 11th, 2018. I am Aaron Krickenberger, and this is your weekly SIG testing meeting. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification button for all your new meetings down below. Today we have James Munnelly is going to walk us through the JetStack testing and config management that they have set up for Prow, which sounds pretty cool. Ben's going to talk us through a discussion of moving Kubernetes and Docker local clusters out of the test infra repo, which I think is kind of long overdue. And then we have a couple other things that hopefully we can get to, but I will stop rambling and hand it over to James.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, can everyone see my screen there?
Yes, you have a Google tab open.
Yes. Cool. So yeah, for a bit of background, we've been running Prow for quite a while now. And when we first deployed it, we just forked test infra, which was all well and good, but rebases when you get 600 commits ahead started to get a bit hairy. Lots of git checkout -- hours and then fix things up and pray. So kind of inspired by what OpenShift have done, where they've split out all of their configuration into, I think, the release repo. I looked into doing a similar thing and have finally managed to split everything apart from the upstream test infra, so get all of our configuration out. In the meantime as well, I also managed to get everything kind of powered through Bazel, once again inspired by how you're doing the Prow cluster deployments. So yeah, this is kind of our new repository for everything, JetStack testing. So the test infra repo is now just matching master of the upstream, and we can merge in additional things into there. So this is used like test infra to deploy Prow itself with the production.apply rule. Got some documentation for it all here too, which we had to put together if I can find deploying a new version of Prow. So yeah, as I say, it's all driven through Bazel. So what I might quickly do is just deploy or upgrade our Prow, because I did do it earlier. I know now it's only like 20 commits or so, just to show you that workflow. So I'll be quick with it as well, I promise. So I'm sure everyone's got lots to do. Share my... sorry, just 1 second. I think it's... There. Cool. So yeah, what we have there, first of all, a few changes, but that's not too much of an issue. So first, what I'll do is go into our test infra fork. Cool, so I'll just get the latest changes from our upstream, and then I do a merge in of Kubernetes upstream there. I would normally do a pull request, but I think we'll be okay. Yeah, okay, so there's a few changes in there. Just kind of putting trust in everyone else, because otherwise I'm going to be spending the rest of this call rolling back these changes. But yeah, I can go ahead then and push that to our upstream. And then just grab that commit ref. And now if I go into my workspace file, I've got test infra here just to find. Can go ahead there and just update that. And just by doing a Bazel run of the production.apply job, that will actually now go through. It might kill my internet because I've got really bad internet, so I might have to cancel it if the call starts going funny. But that will now actually go ahead and go and build all of those images of Prow, generate the new manifests, and roll them out to, so roll them out to the build cluster. So I've just seen there's a couple of questions. Okay, yeah, I'll get to that in a second. So yeah, I'll go ahead. I don't know how my internet's going to go, but I think, yeah, that'll actually push up the images to our own Docker registry. I won't leave that running because, as I say, my internet is really bad. I think others have seen where that goes from there. It goes ahead and pushes up an image. So it's pretty smooth in that respect. I also managed to get our actual CI images building through this. So it's the equivalent of the images directory in the test infra repo. After I got everything else in Bazel, it started to bother me that more wasn't. So we've got our images directory here, for example. If I go into the cert manager E2E directory, we just have a build.bazel to begin with. That references an image here, which is / images Bazel build : image, which is our equivalent of the Bazel build image, like Upstream has. So you can see, which is just here. In order to do this, though, we had to add support for building from Docker files, as building from a Docker file is kind of, by definition, not particularly hermetic because of the things like the run commands. And no one really wanted to have to do everything, like dropping all of these things in through Bazel. So I've written an extra workspace rule that basically allows us to take this and expose a container load target in our workspace. Just trying to remember where I am in my directory tree. Oh, CD, right. And yeah, so you can see here that particular image, we can expose that to the rest of the Bazel project using a container _ Dockerfile rule, which we define here. And that can do things like build matrix too, so we can do multiple different versions of Bazel just by specifying more in there. It will also go ahead, by defining, from there we then have our push targets defined as a standard rules _ Docker push target. So we can just go ahead and push all of our images and they'll get automatically tagged, which has made it a lot easier to manage things instead of having to switch between make files and Bazel and this, that, and the other, and keeping things up to date. We then use the decorated, I had to port over the Bootstrap script to point to this repository, which wasn't too difficult. But then also at the same time, we switched over the majority of our repositories to the decorated job config stuff, which is working really well, actually. And we've managed to get that set up for a private repository now too, as of today, after a few issues. Yeah, there's not really a big crescendo to any of this. I mean, we are talking about configuration management, which I don't think was ever going to be particularly exciting, but if there's any questions on it, I'm quite happy with how it's ended out now. And yeah, it seems to be a sustainable model so far.
So for the container images that you're building here, like what is the scope of images that you're planning on building? Is it just the ones containing artifacts coming out of the test infra repo, or are you looking at other things like, for example, busybox that are called over the course of a test pass?
Sorry, I had to find the mute button. Yeah, so we have a few, hopefully you can see my screen again there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a few different ones. So we don't just build the Prow components, they are a part of it, but then also the images containing all the dependencies needed for each build. So the equivalent of test infra / images. So it's the equivalent of these images that we also push by that repo.
Okay.
If that's the question you're asking.
I think Patrick's question may have been for the test, the images that are used in E2E tests against Kubernetes, right? Like we don't have a great solution for that, but this could be good.
Yeah.
I've muted.
I think we're good.
Okay, one of the machines in this room is unmuted now. The other one is sorry about that. I think we would have to evaluate very carefully how we handle the hermeticness of this, particularly for caching in CI, but it's certainly like a solvable thing. You could do stuff like tell Docker, don't cache the actual build. We'll just have Bazel cache the entire step of building. And we can identify like what version of Docker we're using on what host as one of the keys in the cache and things like that. And I don't think that would be super hard, but we would need to do that. Anytime you write a Bazel rule that starts calling out to things on the host, you're like kind of asking to circumvent how hermetic Bazel is, and that can cause problems for caching, which is part of why they typically don't ship rules like this themselves. But I know that one of the maintainers of rules Docker has wanted to do something like this for a while because it is so hard to take a lot of really useful Docker files and get rid of all the run statements in them.
Yeah, I'm kind of, so far, I haven't actually seen my workspace file dependencies being cached. So I haven't quite hit something there. There is obviously the fear all the time of my images changing over time because Debian's bumped something. But I suppose that's kind of on me. I should tag more precisely in my images and pin versions and stuff.
So you mentioned liking the Bazel experience has been pretty nice for you. I'm curious, it sounds like maybe your pain point was you were flipping back and forth between Bazel and Makefiles. And you maybe had a choice to choose between doing everything with a set of consistent Makefiles versus doing everything with Bazel. What made you choose to go the Bazel route, and what sort of life lessons do you feel like you learned along the way?
I think that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think a well-made set of Makefiles probably would, and consistently made probably would work quite well. I guess I don't particularly enjoy Make, and also it was the case of different dependency versions kind of drifting and having to keep track of those. So I think, or just having to keep track of them somewhere centrally. Of course, that could just be a bash script that checks the bin directory and makes sure some SHAs are correct. But it was kind of just looking for a consistent way to model this. I also kind of use this as a bit of a pilot for switching Cert Manager over to this, because we have run into issues there, and we have quite a lot of different generated files, and we quite regularly get users who are generating things with 3 different dependency versions off, and it get quite complicated. So I kind of use this as a bit of a pilot for that, and also just because we are moving everything out of the other repo, so it was a good opportunity to.
That makes sense. I mean, my personal selfish thing is, and this is kind of begging the question or leading into Ben's thing, but like I feel like we have too much stuff in our test info repo, and one of the biggest points of friction to introducing new people to Prow is like, I'd love to be able to say, just like run this thing and boom, you have a Prow cluster, and then set up another repo for your configs or whatever. And right now it's like, oh, fork this massive repo that has like 15 different sub-projects in it, and you really only care about these 2 tiny files in here, and then this directory over here and stuff. So I think you've done a really great job of splitting those things up. I'm kind of curious whether or not we could follow your path. My only little bit of hesitance is like, well, I am now sold on Bazel, especially in a world where you're trying to keep track of dependencies in different languages or different artifacts. I'm still unclear on how friendly it is to the newcomer. So it sounds like it's made it kind of like a seamless experience for you, but it's like yet another thing to install.
Yeah, I would have a little bit of concern about saying, hey, to use Prow, you need to use Bazel. But on the other hand, it would be really cool to say, hey, here's a model repo, copy this, and whenever you want to upgrade test infra, just bump this hash in your workspace file. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what another thing that I was looking at is actually making use of multiple Prow clusters so we can stage things more easily, because I think we're pretty close to being able to get it down to, like you say, just a couple of extra lines to say, oh, point at this context and deploy there as well, and then we can start testing things out. I definitely agree on the learning curve, as it were, for Basil, having spent a few weeks trying to go along that curve.
I guess my last question, if nobody has anything else, is one of the things we use a lot in test infra is the config updater plugin, which lets us avoid a lot of redeploys. So when a PR merges, boom, a config map gets updated, and that's all that we care about. How well does your setup play with that?
Yeah, no, that works perfectly. I think I might be looking in the wrong file, but yeah. So that works just fine. We just enabled config updater like this, and then jetstack/testing has the plugin enabled. To be honest, Prowl's pretty well set up for doing this and splitting it out. So I know, or I've heard that you're also trying to split out some of the basically configuration.
We've been sort of doing Kubernetes staging style, where we're like moving things into a folder, and then once we know everything's in the folder, then we can try to move it out. But it's really cool to see that you're able to just do it. We should really look at that. I think we've mostly been coming at it from the point of we want to keep testing for all the config and extra group and move Prow out because it's one of the more polished-ish things. But it might be interesting to look at it from a, what if we move the config out and then we move the Prow out? Since moving the config out might be more doable and at least remove the pain point of trying to track upstream and avoid merge conflicts and stuff.
One very, very last thing I'll mention, because I noticed it, well, I always found it a bit of a pain upstream with the bootstrap images, is managing that bootstrap.py file and making sure you have a consistent one. So I've gotten rid of it from our Docker file now, and it's Basil that drops that in. We have our bootstrap image bundle. I went all in on writing my own rules as well, and that drops in all necessary dependencies, minus things.
Big plus one on that. We were going to move it into the image, and then we decided we wanted to just kill Bootstrap. Sen is finally going after that a bit. We just piloted moving it into InTest to eliminating Bootstrap out of the layers of scripts that executed into InTest just last night, and it's mostly working.
And just to lead on to the next point then from Ben, we've also got his new Kind project integrated into all of this and running our end-to-end test for Cert Manager as well. So yeah, users.
Yay, awesome. I think on that note, I will hand off to Ben to talk to us about Kind.
Okay, so I've demoed it a little bit before, so I might not necessarily go into all of that, but in a gist, it lets you run a local Kubernetes cluster using Docker and Docker containers, which is not necessarily new. Local clusters have existed, and Docker containers have existed. But we wanted a couple of things different that would work well for us in CI. Really wanted something very maintainable in Go and consumable and reusable. We wanted like actual config management and things. We're really concerned with this being stable, and we have a bunch of nasty bash deploys like the GC one right now that we depend on for nearly everything, and we kind of want to move away from that. The other thing being that some of the ones like Minikube have a very polished experience, but they have a little bit more overhead. We can't do nested virtualization on our current setup, and it doesn't really support building from source, and it doesn't look very trivial to do that. It really does released Kubernetes versions. Whereas we really, a lot of the time, want to be testing against like, some Kubernetes version, run the conformance tests. So Kind targets Kubernetes 1.11 plus, so it has kubeatum config and can do that properly. The goal is to run, at the very least, the conformance suite and make that very fast and cheap and easily locally replicable. And we're pretty much to that point. There are some flake issues with some of the conformance tests, but I think I might have that pinned down finally. So up until this point, we've been incubating it in Test Infra as a follow-up to some previous Docker and Docker work that we've had. But to some of the earlier points, Test Infra is sort of this monolithic repo of every random tool we've built for testing Kubernetes. I would like to move it out. I've posted to the mailing list, and so far it looks like the leads are okay with this, but I wanted to bring it up in the meeting and run it by everyone. I'm hoping to move it to a Kubernetes SIG repo so that I can start doing some actual blocking into and precedents on the kind code base itself, rather than adding those to test infra and making test infra PR significantly slower. I'd also like to be able to stably version it back to kubetest so that we can use it without worrying about like head breaking it immediately, because then we can actually depend on it a bit. I know James has set this up for Cert Manager a bit, and it seems to be working, but I'd like to keep it that way and not break them.
So yeah. I got a quick question on this. So I know that kubetest already had different cluster providers to do all the setup, and like I've got one that we're working on for deploying clusters on Azure. But it kind of seems like you've sort of flipped this around and said, let's build a cluster first and then run kubetest inside of it. Have there been any particular benefits to that approach other than the faster setup? I mean, do you think it's going to be more maintainable or anything like that?
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm going to treat this like a normal provider, but to this point, I've not wanted to add the code to kubetest because it's not. There's nothing forcing this to be stable. I'm actually considering even just having kubetest call out to it so we can avoid pulling it too much. Yeah, I don't think it should be different than any other provider. The main reason we wanted this is that basically all the providers we have now, if you want to test Kubernetes, you need to be able to rent some cloud resources.
Yeah.
And, the spin up time can also be pretty bad. Cops and GC and things can easily spend like 10, 15 minutes getting a nice 3-node cluster with network.
Yeah, absolutely.
Set up. I've been able to run everything. I've been able to, in parallel, excluding the 9 or so serial tests that we have marked as conformance, run all of the other conformance tests in 15 minutes, including checking out Kubernetes, building, making node images, booting a cluster, running the tests, tearing it down. And this is something that you can also just run on like a laptop.
Yeah. Yeah, because like the other thing I was thinking about is like if I wanted to add a Windows node to this, it would be relatively easy to call out to Vagrant, bring up a VM, and now I've got Windows and Linux nodes there. It would be relatively straightforward to do, but I guess my question is, do you see that being in separate tools like Kind, or is that something that makes more sense for kubetest itself?
So VMs are definitely something that I think we want at some point. A couple of problems we've had, they're a lot slower. I think James can actually point to that a bit. And for RCI at least, we've been leveraging GKE, which lets the handful of us that we have maintaining all of this not focus much on keeping the cluster up anymore like we were thinking. But as a trade-off, we actually don't have nested virtualization. We can get that through some funky business that would be possible, but like I said, the overhead's not as good, and we've had pretty good luck with Docker and Docker. That said, I think Windows testing is another ballgame for basically every testing.
It's going to be Windows caught up. There's a number of cases where you can't run it in Docker. So,
yeah, I'm not too familiar with doing it on Windows yet. I'm actually intending to try to get the Linux nodes to boot on Docker for Windows at some point. I've got it working on Docker for Mac. I think the biggest problem with all of them is going to be when I reintroduce multi-node support. Networking is going to be really fun on Mac and Windows, but it should be possible.
Okay.
Yeah, so as like one of the members of the GitHub admin team, and also as a SIG testing lead, like I'm super in favor of this breaking out. And then the only thing I really require is a decision from this SIG that we agree we want to create a new repo. And then I was going to suggest creating a repo called Kind in Kubernetes SIGs, because we don't have to go through SIG architecture or anything like that. Kubernetes SIGs is free to play for SIGs. I'm like, since we've heard from 3 of the SIG leads, does anybody else here have any objections to making a new repo in Kubernetes SIGs? Cool. All right. That's pretty much all I need. Yeah. Oh my God. Just like Ben first approached me saying like, "Hey, Mr. GitHub Labels, since you've had fun like reducing all these kind labels, would it like how much would your head explode if I called my new project kind?" It's like whichever answer is going to make you actually go through with this because I think it's super awesome.
I can blame James for that. Quinn and Lee had done quite a bit of work on prototyping our previous iteration on this, and it was just called DIND for Docker and Docker, which is not the most imaginative name, and also one that is confusing and used all over the place. I think in the long term, I might end up regretting a little bit having Docker there, but I think we can get away with just calling it kind the friendly local cluster or something and deal with that later. Something else that we're looking at is like other runtimes and maybe VMs. I won't want to touch VMs until this is much more solved, and we've talked more with the Minikube folks about that.
As an alternative, I had a prototype of something like this, and I called it Kindin Din Dink, I think, because it was 3 or 4 layers of Kubernetes in Docker and Kubernetes. So it's a fallback.
As a small note, that's the other very fun thing in our CI. Whenever we have tools that want to use Docker, we actually run Docker and Docker so that they're not mucking with the one that the kubelet's talking to. So when we run kind in CI, we're actually running a Docker container that is the CI job, which runs Docker and Docker. And then we run the kind nodes as another container, which run Docker and which run the pods that Kubernetes is running. And we run a Kubernetes cluster on a Kubernetes cluster, which is super fun.
Diagram.
Inception sound.
I promise diagrams soon.
Got one that I'll dig out. I did one a while ago.
Finder care.
That would be super appreciated. So since we're running low on time, I saw Patrick had a question about how can we move forward with open questions such as, and then you have something linked, which I will post in chat. Did you want to,
Yeah. So the quick summary on that one is, we've had this PR to basically set it up where you could specify a different repo to have all the images containing test collateral that you need. So it's really kind of in the vein of configuration management. But there is a question on whether or not we can move something into a flag. And what we've discovered is that if we put this into a flag, several of the places that need to be able to reference the container registry are already effectively doing stuff before the flags are even fully processed. And so we've got something where it's like we can't do what the reviewers asked for. And so the question is like, what do we do next there? Because the design proposed was not something that appears to be feasible, and we need somebody to take another look at this.
So this might be the right group of people, but I know I personally am really heads down for the current outgoing release, and so I don't anticipate this PR getting merged before then. Like if it was something, so the phrase, the way you described it doesn't make it sound like we just need a little push to get it over the line. It's more like we need some suggestions on how to redesign this to support our use case.
Well, we had the code completed. Someone suggested a redesign. We think the redesign's not feasible. And so the question is, can we go forward, or do we want to take this into a more formal redesign?
I would add that I know that there is some ongoing effort. Patrick Oley is one of the people doing this on like the way we configure E2E tests is maybe kind of not the best and needs some rethink. It might be worth syncing up with that. I know I don't have it handy, but I know at least in testing Slack, there's been some discussion of this fairly recently. I will echo Aaron. I think we're really close to the release, and we probably should look at getting this in then maybe a bump or the next cycle. I also don't have enough background on what the correct answer for this, but I would like to just go through.
The other bit of etiquette is like so your reviewer's tone of voice didn't necessarily imply like this is a hard stop until you redesign. It's just like, I think we talked about this last time, and if you respond back like this really isn't feasible, this is too much. He's generally been a pretty reasonable guy. I know that sometimes PR reviewers tend to wander off and disappear for days at a time. I am guilty of that. Pinging them out of band on Slack or email can sometimes help.
Okay.
If it is something you want to sneak in the release, like the release team is a very high attention, high signal place, but you got to have a good reason to put something in this late in the game.
I would also add super quickly that if you do think it is, if you go to particularly the SIG release Slack and make a case of them, they are, reasonable. Like continually pinging people is one of the unfortunate ones. E2E tests in particular, I think most of the people that pay attention to these things are doing too many things, and there are not enough people that are spending a lot of time specifically on these, so it's really hard to get good reviews. If you can, just like keep reminding people and try to get someone on it.
Okay. Yeah, it's just from a time perspective, we're basically trying to get, the Windows tests stable, and if the tests don't get merged until, feature freeze, then that means we've got 2 weeks of test runs to fix bugs. And so it really impedes our ability for SIG Windows to be able to move forward with fixing bugs if we can't get the tests going. So that's why I'm trying to, I know we're in a release now, so my ask would be can we get this done super, super early in 13 so that way we can run it for several weeks?
I 100% agree with that. And I tend to have a much more, I can be a lot pushier if this is about improving test coverage and stuff. So for me, it's just, I'm unclear how risky this is in terms of it breaking existing tests. Okay. All I have are the pre-submits to go on, but if you can convince me, I can be an ally on your side and we can push forward on this. And as Ben said, the release team can be reasonable. So, this is a lot of human talking stuff.
Yeah, I also totally agree. I would really like to see this go forward. I've been trying to continually follow up on the PR sim test info related to this. I think this is an effort we definitely want to see go through. I just don't know that necessarily the people here have all of the right bandwidth and background. And I'm not really sure who does on things like how the E2E test flags work. I don't know if there's anyone paying good attention to that historically, but I know that people are looking into fixing it now.
You might be able, Ben, if or anybody in the Sunnyvale office, if you can maybe tap Jeff Grafton on the shoulder and see if he could give this a once-over, that might help, just as he's somebody who kind of overlaps in that area of Docker images, and he used to have some E2E framework expertise.
I can attempt to. Unfortunately, Jeff had to be out for personal reasons, and the rest of the team has a huge load today to kind of squeeze some things in.
Yes. I remember this now. Not the best thinky.
That would definitely work well, but it would probably not happen until after the release because he's going to be out.
Okay.
Okay. Well, but we can continue this on Slack, and I'll ping the main PR again. Okay.
All right. One last thing I wanted to hand off to. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Is it Ofer or Offer? Let's find out which it is.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So my name is Ofer. I'm going to present this next time, but today I'm just going to mention it. I'm developing a code review tool that is pretty special. It's multi-repo, so you can have one review for a couple of changes in a couple of repositories. And every repository can actually be hosted in a different place. So one can be in GitLab, one can be in GitHub, one can even be on-prem, and they can all be part of the same review. And it can also help companies collaborate on open source projects. So every company has its own private repo, and there's this common open source common one. And so you could have one PR that spans all of the repos, and the code that is private stays private. So yeah, those are the cool things about it. So companies can actually collaborate on open source being at head. So that's the cool thing about it. I don't have time to really get into the details. but I will post a link to the code, which is open source. And you can take a look at the demo video I made of it. And that's it.
Cool. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks for
Fair. And looking forward to that next week. So thanks everybody for sticking around for a little bit longer than usual. I think that's all we have. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
See ya.